You are at dinner. Someone is talking. You are nodding in the right places. And underneath the nodding, so quiet you almost miss it, is the thought. Nobody in this room actually knows me. Not a dramatic thought, not a crisis, just a fact, arriving unbidden, the way a small, true thing sometimes surfaces when you weren't bracing for it. You look around. The people are real. The warmth is real. Nothing is technically wrong. And the thought dissolves before you can examine it. You pick up your fork. You rejoin the conversation. You make someone laugh. By the time you get home, you've forgotten it happened. You haven't forgotten it happened. This book is about that thought, where it comes from, why it keeps arriving despite the full calendar and the people who love you and the life that, from any reasonable external vantage point, is going fine. Why the standard prescriptions, more socializing, more openness, more time with people, do nothing to touch it. And why the fact that you feel this way, given how surrounded you are, has been quietly convincing you that something is wrong with you specifically. Nothing is wrong with you specifically. I spent years treating this feeling as evidence of some private insufficiency, some deficiency in my capacity for connection that other people, the ones who seemed genuinely at ease, had simply been born without. It took longer than I'd like to admit to understand that the feeling wasn't pointing at other people at all. It was pointing somewhere else entirely, somewhere much closer. The loneliness you've been carrying is not a gap between you and other people. It is a gap between who you are and who you keep showing up as. That gap has a mechanics. This book is its autopsy. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I read every single one. It's always interesting to see where this reaches. Chapter 1. Alone versus lonely. They are not cousins. A man sits in his car in the driveway for 11 minutes before going inside. He is not on the phone. He is not listening to anything. He is just sitting there, in the dark, in the quiet, doing nothing. And something about those 11 minutes is the best part of his day. Inside the house, his wife, his kids, dinner on the table, a full evening of people who need things from him. He loves them. He is not running from them. He is, if you look at it from the outside, a man who has everything. But he needs 11 minutes in the car first, just to be nothing. No one's anything. Just a person breathing. That man is not lonely. He is, in those 11 minutes, the opposite of lonely. He is completely at rest inside himself. Now picture someone else. Different scene. A party on a Saturday night. Drinks, music, 30 people he sees regularly. He is mid-conversation, laughing, actually laughing, and it hits him without warning. That thing, the specific silence. He is standing in a room full of people who like him, and he feels like he is behind glass. That man is not alone, but he is the loneliest person in the room. Here is what this tells you. Alone and lonely are not a spectrum. They are not 2 points on the same line. They don't even run in the same direction. You can be profoundly alone and feel no loneliness whatsoever. You can be surrounded by warmth and noise and care and feel it acutely. The two experiences share a name category and almost nothing else. This distinction is not academic. It is the entire reason standard loneliness advice fails. When someone says, "I feel lonely," the cultural response is to add people. More plans, more contact, more social surface area, which would make perfect sense if loneliness were caused by the absence of people. But it isn't. The man at the party has people. The problem is not supply. The problem is signal. Loneliness is not an absence. It is a signal. A persistent, neurologically real signal that something necessary is missing from your social experience. Not people, not proximity, not frequency of contact. Something more specific. The signal fires when you are not known. When the interactions you're having don't involve the actual you. When the version of you that showed up today is a managed, edited, presentable version, and the real one stayed home. That's why the party doesn't help. That's why 30 people who like you can still leave you hollow. They like the version you brought. The version that laughs at the right moments and doesn't say the weird thing and keeps it moving. They have never met the rest of you. And somewhere below the level of your conscious thoughts, your nervous system is aware of this, and it fires the signal. Meanwhile, the man in the car, the one with 11 minutes of silence and nothing to perform, that man's nervous system is quiet. Not because he's alone, because for 11 minutes, the gap between who he is and what he's presenting has closed. They're the same thing. There's no one to manage. He is fully himself, and he knows it. That is what the absence of loneliness actually feels like. Not joy, not connection, just stillness. A self that isn't working overtime to be acceptable. Here is the part that makes this harder. Most people cannot tell the difference between being alone and feeling lonely. They experience both as the same instruction. Get around people. So they do. They fill the calendar. They answer the texts. They make the plans. And the plans help a little the way scratching a sunburn helps. It addresses the sensation without touching the source. I used to be one of those people who filled silence faster than it could form. A quiet evening felt like a problem to solve. I'd scroll, text, find something to do, anything to avoid the stillness. What I was actually avoiding was the moment when I'd have to sit with myself and notice that I hadn't really been myself all day. The people hadn't been the solution. They'd been the distraction. The actual mechanism is this. Solitude is metabolized. Loneliness is not. When you are genuinely alone, not running from something, not killing time, but just present in your own company, you are doing something. Processing, integrating. Resting in the most literal sense, which is to rest from the effort of being perceived. Solitude has a feeling of completion to it. When it's real, loneliness never completes. It just accumulates, which is why people who are chronically lonely often report feeling more depleted after social events, not less. They went in hoping for relief. They performed for 3 hours. They came home more hollow than they left. The math doesn't add up until you understand that they were never treating the actual problem. They were adding people to a situation that was never about people. The fix is not fewer people either, to be clear. That is not where this ends up. But you cannot begin to understand what is actually wrong until you accept one thing plainly. Loneliness does not mean you need more humans in the room. It means something is not being met in the humans you already have. Or more precisely, something is not being brought to those humans. Something that could be met if it showed up. The man at the party goes home feeling like no one knows him. He is right. No one does. But the more uncomfortable truth, the one that will take the rest of this book to fully land, is that he never showed them anything to know. He spent the evening in the car, just with other people watching. Chapter 2, The Performance Reviewed. She has been friends with Dana for 6 years. They get coffee every few weeks. They text regularly. They know each other's family situations, job frustrations, the general shape of each other's lives. By any reasonable measure, they are close. At the coffee shop last Tuesday, they talked for 2 hours. It was fine. It was good even. They laughed. They caught up. They paid and hugged and said we should do this more and meant it. She drove home and felt nothing. Not disappointed, not sad, just empty. Like she'd attended a meeting that went well. She felt vaguely guilty about this because Dana is a good person and she does care about her. But something about the 2 hours had produced no residue, no warmth that lasted into the evening. She had been there, fully there, and come back with nothing. She assumes this is something wrong with her. It isn't. What happened at that coffee shop, and what happens at most social interactions between most adults, was not connection. It was coordination. Two people managing what the other person sees, adjusting in real time, presenting the version of themselves that is easiest to be around. Not lying, not performing in the theatrical sense, just careful. Careful with the difficult thing they almost said. Careful with the opinion they softened. Careful with the feeling they mentioned briefly and then walked back with a joke. Both of them careful, the whole time. That is the mechanism, and it produces exactly the feeling she had in the car. A technically successful interaction that leaves no mark. A sociologist named Irving Goffman spent most of his career documenting this. His basic observation was that social life is dramaturgical. Everyone is always managing a front stage and a backstage. The front stage is what you present. The backstage is where you actually exist. And in most adult social interactions, two front stages meet, perform for each other, and part ways. It is functionally two people being alone together. Politely. With eye contact. This would be less of a problem if people knew that's what was happening. But they don't. They experience the hollowness afterward and they misread it. They think, I need to socialize more, or something is wrong with my friendships, or the worst one, something is wrong with me, because normal people don't feel empty after a nice coffee with a good friend. Nothing is wrong with them. They are getting exactly what that kind of interaction produces, which is surface contact, which is not nothing. Surface contact is real and it matters socially and neurologically, but it is not connection. And it will not treat loneliness. Because loneliness is not caused by a lack of surface contact. Most lonely people are drowning in it. What loneliness is caused by is a lack of moments where the backstage gets shown, not performed vulnerability. That's different, and we'll get to that. Actual backstage, the opinion you actually hold, the thing you actually felt, the version of the story you don't edit for palatability. That stuff, the stuff you thought in the car on the way there, before you decided it was probably too much. It almost never makes it into the conversation, and both people leave a little more unknown than they arrived. I watched this happen to two colleagues over a long work trip. A week of shared meals, late nights, real proximity. By day 3, they were finishing each other's sentences. I remember thinking they seemed like they'd known each other for years. Then we got home. The structure ended, and they went back to being friendly strangers. The intimacy had been situational. Take away the context, and there was nothing underneath it. It looked exactly like connection and produced none of the residue. Here is what makes this particularly strange. Most people are actually more honest with strangers than with the people they know well. Research on this is consistent and slightly embarrassing. The person next to you on a 6-hour flight, will hear things your closest friends haven't. The bartender gets the real version. The person at the party you just met and will never see again. That person sometimes gets 20 minutes of startling honesty. Why? Because there is no reputation to protect, no relationship to manage, no future interaction where this moment will be remembered and held. The stakes are zero, so the editing stops. And in the absence of editing, something that resembles actual contact happens, which tells you something important about why connection is hard with the people who matter most. The closer the relationship, the more you have to lose by being real in it. The longer the friendship, the more carefully constructed the front stage has become. Every relationship accumulates a version of you, an agreed-upon character that both people have signed off on, and stepping outside that character feels risky in a way that talking to a stranger never does. So people don't. They maintain the character. They stay careful. They have coffee every few weeks and hug goodbye and mean it when they say we should do this more. And they drive home and feel nothing. The loneliness is not a sign that the friendship failed. It's a sign that the friendship has been operating entirely on the front stage for so long that neither person remembers there's a backstage. It's not coldness. It's not distance. It's two people being so consistently careful around each other that the careful version has become the only version either of them knows. Dana probably felt the same thing in her car. She just didn't say so, because that would have required showing something. And showing something, after 6 years of careful, feels like a very strange thing to suddenly start doing. But it's the only thing that would have made a difference. You're still here. 2 chapters in, that's not nothing. Most people who clicked this video moved on before they got uncomfortable. You didn't. Which means something in here is hitting close enough to stay. If that's the case, subscribe. Not because this channel needs it, because the next time you want this kind of thinking, you'll want to find it without looking for it. That's all. Back to the part that actually matters. Chapter 3, The Hiding Tax. Marcus has a theory about consciousness that he finds genuinely fascinating. He has had it for years. He's read around it, thought about it, revised it. It's not a casual opinion. It's a real thing he carries, something that quietly shapes how he sees the world. He brought it up once, at a dinner party about 4 years ago. Someone made a polite face. Someone else changed the subject. He laughed it off and moved on, and has not mentioned it since. He still thinks about it constantly. At parties now, Marcus is good company. Warm, funny, easy to talk to. He asks good questions. He never makes the room uncomfortable. He has learned, with considerable precision, exactly how much of himself to bring into any given situation, which is not the consciousness theory, not the thing he read last week that genuinely disturbed him, not the feeling he can't quite name that's been sitting in his chest since February. He brings the version that works, the edited Marcus, the one people enjoy, and Marcus, surrounded by people who enjoy him, feels completely invisible. This is the hiding tax, and everyone pays it. Most people just don't know that's what the emptiness is. Here is how the mechanism works. You have something, an opinion, a feeling, an interest, a wound, a strange preoccupation that feels too much, or too weird, or too risky to show. So you hide it. Reasonable, self-protective. In isolated moments, probably correct. But over time, a pattern calcifies. The hiding becomes automatic. You stop even deciding whether to show a thing. You just edit it out before it reaches the surface. And then one day, you're standing in a room full of people who genuinely like you, and you feel like a ghost. Because a ghost is exactly what you've become. Present, visible, generating no impression of depth, because the depth has been quietly relocated somewhere no one can reach it. The standard story about hiding, the one therapy made popular, is that you hide the bad parts, the shameful parts, the broken, messy, unacceptable parts. And yes, people hide those. But that is not what produces the most loneliness. What produces the most loneliness is hiding the specific parts. The consciousness theory. The thing you find funny that no one else seems to. The grief that went on longer than felt socially acceptable. The genuine opinion that you know will make someone uncomfortable. Those are not your flaws. Those are your texture. The particular shape of you, the thing that makes you distinguishable from 1,000 other pleasant, easy-to-be-around people. And when you hide texture, you don't become safer. You become flat. A flat person cannot be known. You can be liked, enormously. You can be popular, successful, well-regarded. People can speak warmly about you at your retirement party. None of that is the same as being known, and the nervous system knows the difference. It keeps the signal running regardless of how many people are in the room. This doesn't count. They don't know. This doesn't count. The cruel efficiency of the hiding tax is that it compounds. You hide one thing and feel unseen. Feeling unseen feels dangerous, so you hide more. The more you hide, the less anyone can actually reach you. The less they can reach you, the more unseen you feel. It is not a spiral. A spiral at least moves. This is a lock. Click by click, year by year, until the distance between who you are and who you present has become so habitual that it no longer feels like a choice. It feels like just how you are. I kept a version of this going for longer than I'd like to admit. Not the dramatic kind, not hiding trauma or shame, just the quieter kind. Sandpapering the edges off things before I said them. The real opinion replaced with a softer version. The actual feeling summarized into something more manageable. I thought I was being considerate. What I was actually doing was making genuine contact impossible, and then wondering why I felt so far away from people. The part that still gets me is how long it took to notice. Hiding at that level doesn't feel like hiding. It feels like social competence. Now, here is where most books about authenticity make their wrong turn. They diagnose this correctly and then prescribe disclosure. Tell people more. Be vulnerable, let them in. Which sounds right and lands completely wrong, because disclosure without trust is not authenticity. It's a performance of authenticity. And people can feel the difference. You've been in those conversations. Someone tells you something real and you feel it. It lands. It changes the temperature of the room. Something shifts. And then you've been in conversations where someone tells you something real adjacent, something that sounds like a confession, but arrives with a kind of rehearsed quality. It doesn't land, because it's still managed, still a front stage production, just with a more expensive set. Genuine showing isn't a strategy. It's what happens when you stop treating every interaction as a risk assessment. Which is, admittedly, very hard to do when the last time you brought up the consciousness theory, someone made a polite face. The thing you are most afraid to show is the thing that would make someone feel least alone with you. That is not a motivational statement. It is a structural observation. The parts of yourself you've decided are too much, too strange, too specific, too intense. Those are the exact parts that, when revealed, tend to produce the response. I thought it was just me, Because everyone is hiding something, and almost everyone is hiding the same category of thing. The parts that make them particular, the parts that don't fit cleanly, the parts that got a polite face once and never came out again. Marcus still has the theory. He just stopped having anyone to have it with. Chapter 4. Frequency as a substitute for depth. By 9 in the morning, Priya has already been in contact with 14 people. Not spoken to, not connected with, in contact with. A thumbs up on a group chat. 3 text replies sent while the coffee was brewing. A comment on a photo of someone's dog. A voice memo she recorded while walking to her car, which is essentially a spoken text message, which is essentially nothing. Her phone shows 14 interactions before she has fully woken up, and something in her brain has logged all of them as social activity. By evening, she will have had contact with somewhere around 40 people. She will feel completely alone. She thinks this says something about her. It doesn't. It says something about the architecture. The phone did not make you more connected. That is the marketing version. What it actually did was give you the sensation of connection, the neurological flicker of it, the slight warmth of acknowledged existence, without delivering the thing itself. A calorie-free food that still trains hunger. You consume contact all day and arrive at dinner genuinely starving, and you don't know why, because by every measurable account, you have been social since 8 a.m. Here is the distinction that matters. There is contact and there is connection, and they produce completely different things in the brain and in the body. Contact is acknowledgement. It is the thumbs up, the reply, the like, the voice memo. It says, I see that you exist. Connection is something else. It is the moment when what you actually are, not your content, not your updates, not your highlight reel, lands with another person and registers. It requires time. It requires some degree of real presence. It cannot be delivered in the format of a notification. The phone is exquisitely, almost diabolically, optimized for contact. It can produce contact at industrial scale, frictionlessly, continuously, in stolen seconds between every other thing you do. What it cannot do, what no technology can do, is compress the conditions under which connection becomes possible. Those conditions are slow. They require the kind of time and attention that feels, in the middle of a busy life, almost wasteful. An hour of conversation that goes somewhere unexpected, the willingness to sit with silence and not fill it. The moment when something real is said and neither person immediately moves on. These things cannot be scheduled in the gaps between meetings. They cannot be delivered in voice memo format. They require, at minimum, that you put the phone down and leave it down long enough to actually arrive somewhere. Most people don't do this, not because they're shallow, because the phone is always faster. I missed the slow version for years without knowing I was missing it. I was responsive. I was in contact with people constantly. I had the receipts, hundreds of texts, the group chats, the check-ins. I was, by the metrics I could see, a person who maintained relationships. It took an unexpectedly long conversation on an evening when I'd forgotten my phone charger, an actual accident of circumstance, to remind me what the other thing felt like. And then I understood what I'd been substituting. The neuroscience here is not subtle. Contact activates social reward circuitry mildly. Connection, real contact, mutual recognition, the experience of being genuinely heard, activates it at a categorically different level. The brain registers the difference even when you don't consciously notice it, which is why you can have 40 contacts in a day and still feel the specific hunger by evening. You've been snacking continuously. You haven't eaten. What the phone also does, and this is the part that rarely gets discussed, is erode your tolerance for the conditions connection requires. Real conversation has dead air. It has moments of awkwardness, of not knowing what to say, of sitting with something uncomfortable while it resolves. These are not bugs. They are the texture of actual contact. The discomfort is where something real is usually about to happen. But if you have spent years filling every silence with a scroll, every pause with a check of the screen, your capacity to sit still inside an uncomfortable moment has been quietly, systematically reduced. You reach for the phone not because you're antisocial, but because stillness has become genuinely hard to tolerate. And a person who cannot tolerate stillness cannot have a real conversation. Because real conversations require that you stay in the room when it gets uncomfortable, that you don't redirect, that you resist the urge to make it easier by making it shallower. Most people are no longer trained for this. The phone has been their coach in the opposite direction for years. Priya is not unusually distracted. She is not failing at something other people are doing well. She is doing exactly what the system was designed to produce. A person in constant low-grade contact with many people, deriving just enough social reward to keep engaging, never quite enough to feel full. The genius of it, from an engineering standpoint, is that the hunger drives the behavior that maintains the hunger. You feel empty, so you check the phone. The phone gives you a flicker. The flicker fades. You feel empty. You check the phone. Nobody designed this to make you lonely. It just turned out that way. The loneliness is a byproduct of an optimization that was never pointed at your well-being. By 10 at night, Priya puts the phone on the charger and lies in the dark. 40-something contacts. 14 since breakfast. The silence that arrives is not the comfortable kind. It is the kind with texture to it. The kind that has been waiting all day for the noise to stop. She reaches for the phone once, automatically, before she catches herself. She puts it back down. The silence doesn't go anywhere. It just sits there, patient as a question that already knows it isn't going to get answered tonight. Chapter 5. The Man Who Played Himself Last. Joel wakes up at 6:15 and is someone's father before he is fully conscious. Breakfast, permission slips, the argument about the jacket, then the commute, and the mental shift. Father becoming manager, the tone recalibrating, the posture changing slightly. 8 hours of being the one who handles it. The one with the answer, the one who stays even when the room gets difficult. Then home, and the shift again. Manager becoming partner. The work face softening, the listening mode switching on. Dinner, bedtime routine. The couch. His wife asks how he is, and he says tired, because that's the word that's available. And it's not wrong, but it's also not quite right. He doesn't know what the right word is. He doesn't know, if pressed, what he actually thinks about anything that happened today. Not his real read, not the unedited version. He has been translating himself into roles for 14 hours, and somewhere in the translation, the original got lost. Joel is not burnt out. He still functions. He still performs every role with reasonable competence. He is not in crisis. He is something quieter, and in some ways harder to name than crisis. He is a person who has been a supporting character in his own life for so long that the question of what he actually wants, not what the father wants, not what the manager wants, not what the partner wants, has become genuinely foreign. Ask him. Watch the pause. This is role fatigue, and it is not the same as burnout, though the two are often confused. Burnout is a resource problem. You ran out of energy performing the roles. Role fatigue is an identity problem. You ran out of self, not the energy to be someone, the someone to be. The difference matters because they require entirely different repairs. Burnout responds to rest. You take the vacation, you sleep, you come back with something refilled. Role fatigue does not respond to rest. Joel took a week off last year. He was bored by day 3. Not because he didn't need a break. He did. But because the absence of roles left a silence he didn't know how to fill. The vacation revealed the problem rather than solving it. What would he do with the time? If not be someone's something? He didn't have an answer. The self is not a stable object. This is the part that surprises people. It feels like it should be stable, the essential you, sitting underneath everything, waiting patiently while the roles rotate. But it doesn't work that way. The self is more like a muscle than an organ. It requires regular, actual use, and the use is specific. You have to make choices as yourself, not as a role, not as the version of you that is optimized for whatever the situation demands. As the actual, particular, idiosyncratic person you are, with preferences that aren't negotiated, with reactions that aren't managed, with things you find interesting for no practical reason, and the things you can't stand even when you probably should be fine with them. When those acts get crowded out, not violently, just gradually, by years of sensible prioritization, what remains is not a tired person. It is a highly functional outline of one. The shape is right. The performance is competent. But the internal texture that makes a person a specific person rather than an interchangeable adult, that has gone quiet. And quiet, in this context, feels exactly like loneliness, which is why role fatigue is one of the most commonly misdiagnosed sources of the feeling. People think, I need more connection, more time with friends, more date nights, more meaningful conversation. They add social contact to a life that is already overscheduled with performed versions of themselves. It doesn't help. It usually makes it worse, because they show up to those connections in role. The friend role, the good husband role, one more hat on a rack that was already full. I watched a woman I know, someone sharp, genuinely funny, with a distinctive way of seeing things, spend about 3 years in a season of life where every single thing she did was for someone else. Young kids, demanding job, ailing parent. The roles were real, and the demands were legitimate, and she handled all of them without visible collapse. But piece by piece, the specific her, the one who had opinions about films, who laughed at things other people didn't find funny, who could lose an hour in an interesting problem, got deferred. Repeatedly. Reasonably. Until one afternoon, she told me she didn't know what she liked anymore. Not in a dramatic way, just factually. Like reporting a small, strange thing she'd noticed. That is not a mental health diagnosis. That is role fatigue at its quietest and most complete. The repair, and there is one, though it's slower than anyone wants, is not rest, and it is not more connection. It is small, regular acts of being yourself, not performing yourself, not optimizing yourself for the people in the room. Actually being the specific person you are, in moments that don't require anything useful from you. Reading what you want to read, having the opinion you actually have. pursuing the interest that has no networking value and impresses no one. These acts feel, at first, almost illegitimately small, too quiet to be the answer to something that aches this much. But they are how the self stays alive. And more importantly, they are how the self becomes available. To yourself first, and then eventually to other people. A person who has been playing roles for 14 hours and hasn't been themselves once has nothing real to bring to connection. Even if connection is exactly what they're starving for. Joel will get asked, "What do you want?" about something small and specific tonight. "What movie? Where should we eat? What do you feel like doing?" He will say, "I don't mind, whatever you want." He will mean it. That's the part that should worry you. Here is Chapter 5. The Man Who Played Himself Last. Approximately 1,000 words. Chapter 5. The Man Who Played Himself Last. Joel wakes up at 6:15 and is someone's father before he is fully conscious. Breakfast, permission slips, the argument about the jacket, then the commute, and the mental shift. Father becoming manager, the tone recalibrating, the posture changing slightly. 8 hours of being the one who handles it, the one with the answer, the one who stays even when the room gets difficult. Then home, and the shift again. Manager becoming partner, the work face softening, the listening mode switching on. Dinner, bedtime routine, the couch. His wife asks how he is, and he says tired, because that's the word that's available. And it's not wrong, but it's also not quite right. He doesn't know what the right word is. He doesn't know, if pressed, what he actually thinks about anything that happened today. Not his real read, not the unedited version. He has been translating himself into roles for 14 hours, and somewhere in the translation, the original got lost. Joel is not burnt out. He still functions. He still performs every role with reasonable competence. He is not in crisis. He is something quieter and in some ways harder to name than crisis. He is a person who has been a supporting character in his own life for so long that the question of what he actually wants, not what the father wants, not what the manager wants, not what the partner wants, has become genuinely foreign. Ask him. Watch the pause. This is role fatigue, and it is not the same as burnout, though the two are often confused. Burnout is a resource problem. You ran out of energy performing the roles. Role fatigue is an identity problem. You ran out of self, not the energy to be someone, the someone to be. The difference matters because they require entirely different repairs. Burnout responds to rest. You take the vacation, you sleep, you come back with something refilled. Role fatigue does not respond to rest. Joel took a week off last year. He was bored by day 3, not because he didn't need a break. He did, but because the absence of roles left a silence he didn't know how to fill. The vacation revealed the problem rather than solving it. What would he do with the time, if not be someone's something? He didn't have an answer. The self is not a stable object. This is the part that surprises people. It feels like it should be stable, the essential you, sitting underneath everything, waiting patiently while the roles rotate. But it doesn't work that way. The self is more like a muscle than an organ. It requires regular, actual use. And the use is specific. You have to make choices as yourself, not as a role, not as the version of you that is optimized for whatever the situation demands. As the actual, particular, idiosyncratic person you are, with preferences that aren't negotiated, with reactions that aren't managed, with things you find interesting for no practical reason, and things you can't stand even when you probably should be fine with them. When those acts get crowded out, not violently, just gradually, by years of sensible prioritization, what remains is not a tired person. It is a highly functional outline of one. The shape is right. The performance is competent. But the internal texture that makes a person a specific person rather than an interchangeable adult, that has gone quiet. And quiet, in this context, feels exactly like loneliness. Which is why role fatigue is one of the most commonly misdiagnosed sources of the feeling. People think, I need more connection, more time with friends, more date nights, more meaningful conversation. They add social contact to a life that is already overscheduled with performed versions of themselves. It doesn't help. It usually makes it worse. Because they show up to those connections in role. The friend role, the good husband role. One more hat on a rack that was already full. I watched a woman I know, someone sharp, genuinely funny, with a distinctive way of seeing things, spend about 3 years in a season of life where every single thing she did was for someone else. Young kids, demanding job, ailing parent. The roles were real and the demands were legitimate, and she handled all of them without visible collapse. But piece by piece, the specific her, the one who had opinions about films, who laughed at things other people didn't find funny, who could lose an hour in an interesting problem, got deferred, repeatedly, reasonably. Until one afternoon, she told me she didn't know what she liked anymore. Not in a dramatic way, just factually. Like reporting a small, strange thing she'd noticed. That is not a mental health diagnosis. That is role fatigue at its quietest and most complete. The repair, and there is one, though it's slower than anyone wants, is not rest, and it is not more connection. It is small, regular acts of being yourself, not performing yourself, not optimizing yourself for the people in the room. Actually being the specific person you are, in moments that don't require anything useful from you. Reading what you want to read, having the opinion you actually have, pursuing the interest that has no networking value and impresses no one. These acts feel, at first, almost illegitimately small. Too quiet to be the answer to something that aches this much. But they are how the self stays alive. And more importantly, they are how the self becomes available, to yourself first, and then eventually, to other people. A person who has been playing roles for 14 hours and hasn't been themselves once, has nothing real to bring to connection. Even if connection is exactly what they're starving for. Joel will get asked, "What do you want?" about something small and specific tonight. "What movie? Where should we eat? What do you feel like doing?" He will say, "I don't mind, whatever you want." He will mean it. That's the part that should worry you. Chapter 6. The hunger that likes doesn't feed. There is a woman named Carol who has, by any reasonable count, a lot of friends. Not acquaintances, actual friends. People who show up. People who remember things. Her birthday never passes without noise. When something goes wrong in her life, the texts arrive within the hour. She has group chats and standing dinners and a social life that most people her age would describe as enviable. She has felt quietly, persistently, incompletely known for most of her adult life, not unloved. She is sure she is loved. Not unliked. She has all the evidence against that. Something more precise and harder to name. The feeling that the people around her have a version of her that is warm and affectionate and approximately right, but has some essential detail wrong. Like a portrait that captures the face and misses the person. She cannot point at the specific thing that's off. She just knows it is. And the knowing sits in her like a low note that never quite resolves. Carol is not ungrateful. She is hungry for something that being liked cannot feed. This is the distinction almost no one makes clearly, and the failure to make it costs people years of misplaced effort. Being liked and being understood are not the same hunger. They do not even overlap very much. Being liked is social safety. It means the people around you have assessed you as acceptable, pleasant, worth keeping around. It is a real and important thing. But it is not nourishment. It is the assurance that you are welcome at the table. It says nothing about whether anyone at the table actually sees you. Being understood is different in kind, not in degree. It is the experience of being accurately witnessed. Someone seeing the actual you, including the strange parts, the contradictory parts, the parts that don't fit the narrative, and not flinching. Not managing you, not redirecting towards something more comfortable, just holding it. I see what you actually are, and I am not leaving. That experience is rarer than it sounds. Most people have had it a handful of times in their lives, if that. Some people are not sure they have had it at all, and the absence of it does not register as the absence of friendship. It registers as a low, nameless dissatisfaction, a slight wrongness that persists despite all the right evidence, which is why Carol, surrounded by people who love her, cannot shake the feeling. Adult friendship, if you look at it without sentimentality, is mostly built on proximity, consistency, and history. You became friends with these people because you were near each other at a formative moment. School, a first job, a neighborhood, and the proximity repeated until something calcified. The friendship is real, but the foundation was situational. And situational proximity does not by itself produce accurate witness. It produces familiarity. These two things are not the same thing, and we treat them like they are constantly. Familiarity is knowing someone's patterns, what they order at restaurants, how they behave under stress, the stories they tell repeatedly, the way they take their coffee. You can be deeply familiar with someone and have almost no idea what is actually happening inside them. Familiarity is the surface of a person, learned over time. Understanding is something underneath the surface that only gets reached if someone goes looking, and only gets found if the other person lets them. Most adult friendships never make that trip. Not from coldness, from busyness, from habit, from the mutual unspoken agreement to stay in the comfortable register. It is easier. It is less risky. It keeps the friendship stable and pleasant and essentially shallow, in the way that a beautifully decorated room can be shallow. Everything in the right place. Nothing that surprises you. Nothing that asks anything of you. The specific hunger Carol carries, the hunger for accurate witness, goes unmet in almost every interaction she has. Not because people don't care, because they are operating in familiarity mode. They know the Carol they have always known. She has never disrupted that version with anything too far outside it. The portrait has been consistent for 15 years. Why would they look for a different one? I held an idea about my own emotional life for a long time. A real one, something I'd worked out carefully. And I couldn't find a single person to say it to who I trusted to actually hear it. Not because my friendships were bad, because I hadn't built the conditions in any of them for that kind of exchange. I'd been likable in them for too long. The shift would have felt, I told myself, too abrupt. What I was actually protecting was the portrait. Easier to stay unknown than to risk the person preferring the portrait. Here is what the research on this is consistent about. The single strongest predictor of feeling connected, not just liked, not just socially active, but genuinely connected, is the sense that at least one person in your life could give an accurate account of your inner experience. Not your biography, not your habits, your inner experience. What it actually feels like to be you, underneath the roles and the managed presentation. Most people cannot name even one person who could do this, not because they are isolated, because they never created the conditions for it, because familiarity crowded out understanding, because being liked felt close enough to being known that the difference was easy to ignore, right up until the low note started, the one Carol can't place, the one that plays on even through the birthday texts and the standing dinners and all the warm and approximate love. The portrait is very good. Carol has made sure of it. But she is not the portrait, and somewhere in the part of her that doesn't have language yet, she is exhausted from pretending she is. Chapter 7. The loneliness in the next room. They have been together 11 years. They are not unhappy. That is the first thing to say, and it matters, because what follows is not a story about a bad relationship. It is a story about a good one. Functional, caring, built on genuine affection, that has developed a specific silence at its center that neither person knows how to name. His name is Richard. She is Sylvie. On paper, stable income, 2 kids doing fine, a house they like, a life that works. They are considerate of each other. They do not fight often, and when they do, they resolve it. They have what most people would look at and call a solid marriage. Most evenings, they sit in the same room and are completely alone. Not hostile, not distant in any visible way, just separately present, each in their own current, moving through the evening in parallel. The television, the phones, the small logistical exchanges that pass for conversation when you live with someone. Did you call the plumber? Yes. The kids need new shoes. I'll get them Thursday. Real sentences. Useful sentences. Sentences that contain no information about what either of them is actually experiencing. This is not neglect. This is what happens when 2 people have slowly, reasonably, through thousands of small and defensible choices, stopped disclosing themselves to each other. It does not happen dramatically. That is why it is so hard to catch. There is no moment where someone decides to stop being known. It is a series of micro-retreats, each one invisible on its own. You had a feeling and didn't mention it because you were tired. You had an opinion and swallowed it because it would have started something. You wanted something and didn't say so because it felt like too much to ask. Each individual omission is completely reasonable. The accumulation of them over years is devastating. What gets built is a relationship operating almost entirely on its history. You know each other, the early version, the version from the formative years, the version that was present and legible and new. That version has been archived. The current version, what Richard actually thinks, what actually worries him, what he finds quietly unbearable about his life right now in this specific season, Sylvie doesn't have access to. Not because he's hiding it, because he stopped offering it, gradually, without noticing. And she stopped asking, gradually, without noticing, because the answers had started feeling predictable. "I know you," which is the last thing you say before you stop looking. The loneliness this produces is the most painful kind in existence. And the reason is not that it's worse in absolute terms. The reason is that it closes the exits. When you are lonely without a partner, the loneliness has an address. You can point at the gap. There is no one there, and the prescription, however hard, is at least legible. Go find connection. Build something. Put yourself in the path of people. The solution is outside you, and you can move toward it. When you are lonely inside a relationship, the gap is in the one place you were supposed to be safe from it. The person is there. They are right there, 11 inches away on the same couch, and the distance between you is somehow greater than any physical space. You cannot leave the room to fix it. You cannot call someone. You are someone's someone, and this is not a problem you are supposed to have. There is no outside solution, because the solution was supposed to be the person next to you. So it sits there, unaddressed, accumulating its particular weight. I said something to my partner once. Not a fight, not a revelation, just a small, true thing I'd been carrying for weeks. And the relief of it surprised me so completely that I understood immediately how long I'd been not doing that. Not because we had a bad relationship, because I had gotten efficient, stopped offering things I assumed she already knew, or wouldn't find interesting, or that would require a longer conversation than the evening had room for. The arithmetic of omission, every single item reasonable. The total, when I finally looked at it, was weeks of being alone in a room with someone who would have listened. What kills disclosure in long relationships is not conflict. Conflict, paradoxically, keeps people present to each other. You are at least fighting about something real. What kills it is assumption. The comfortable, well-meaning, slowly catastrophic belief that you already know what the other person thinks, that their inner life has been understood and filed, that the person you married at 32 is essentially the same person at 43, fully mapped, and what remains is simply to maintain the system. People change. Their inner weather changes. What frightens them changes. What they need changes. What they find beautiful, unbearable, secretly funny, quietly devastating. All of it shifts constantly, like any living thing. And if you stop being curious about the current version, you end up in an intimate relationship with someone's history. A very detailed, very affectionate relationship with a person who no longer quite exists. Sylvie knows Richard. She knows him the way you know a city you grew up in. Every landmark, every shortcut, every reliable feature. She knows where he keeps things and how he moves through the world and what will make him laugh. She has not asked him a genuinely curious question, one with no assumed answer, in longer than either of them would be comfortable admitting. He hasn't asked her one either. They are sitting in the living room right now. The television is on. The kids are in bed. There are maybe 45 minutes before they call it a night. Neither of them will say the real thing. Not because they don't love each other, because the real thing has been waiting so long it has started to feel, somehow, like it belongs to someone else. Chapter 8. The Slow Disappearance. There is a version of Elena that used to exist. She painted, not professionally, not ambitiously, just for the specific pleasure of it. Saturday mornings, 2 hours, music on, nobody needing anything from her. She had opinions about films that she would defend past the point of comfort. She kept a journal, not a productivity journal, not a gratitude list, just a place where she wrote things down in order to find out what she thought. She was, in the specific sense that matters, a person with an interior life that she tended to. But that was 7 years ago. Now she is 39. And if you asked her what she does for herself, not for the kids, not for the job, not for the relationship, but for the actual her, the her that exists underneath the roles, she would give you a look that is equal parts recognition and grief. She knows the question. She doesn't have an answer. The painting stopped first because weekends got complicated. The journal disappeared sometime during the second pregnancy. The film opinions are still there, somewhere, but there hasn't been space to have them properly in longer than she can accurately remember. She did not decide to disappear. She just kept choosing the more urgent thing. This is self-abandonment, and it is nothing like what the word sounds like. It sounds dramatic. It sounds like a choice made in a specific moment, a turning away, a clean act of surrender. It is not. It is quieter than anything dramatic could ever be. It is the accumulation of 10,000 reasonable deferrals, each one perfectly justified, each one costing almost nothing on its own, until one day you are standing in your own life, and the person who used to live there has been slowly, politely, completely crowded out. The mechanism is different from what Chapter 3 described, and the difference matters. Hiding the self, the way Marcus hid the consciousness theory, is about what you conceal from others. You are still there, fully present internally, just not showing it. Self-abandonment goes one level deeper. You are not hiding from others. You are losing track of yourself. The self is not concealed. It is genuinely, functionally absent, not suppressed, gone quiet. The interior life that required tending has been untended for long enough that it has stopped making noise. This is why it feels like loneliness. The loneliness is real. But it is not pointing outward. It is pointing in. What most people do with this loneliness, because the loneliness is real and the body insists on addressing it, is look for its source in other people. The relationship isn't close enough. The friendships aren't deep enough. Something is missing in the connections around them. So they adjust outward. More date nights, better conversations, the concerted effort to be more present with the people they love, which helps briefly the way adjusting the picture frame helps when the wall is crooked. You have addressed the visible surface and left the actual problem exactly where it was. Because the problem is not in the connections. The problem is that there is no longer a coherent self arriving at those connections. You cannot be known by someone else if you have become genuinely unknown to yourself. You cannot be seen if you have stopped being visible even to your own interior. Elena's loneliness will not be solved by a better conversation with her partner. It will not be solved by deeper friendships or more honest self-expression, or any of the things that would have helped 7 years ago. It will only begin to shift when she does something that feels, given everything demanding her attention, almost embarrassingly small. She has to go back for herself, not dramatically, just the painting, the journal, the opinion about the film held long enough to actually be an opinion. The reclamation of small, private, useless to everyone else acts of being a specific person. These things will feel selfish. That is diagnostic. The fact that spending 2 hours on a Saturday doing something that produces nothing useful for anyone feels like a moral failing tells you exactly how complete the disappearance has been. When tending to your own existence registers as selfishness, you have been a supporting character for too long. I watched this happen to someone close to me, a man in his mid-40s who had spent the better part of a decade being extraordinary at everything everyone needed him to be. Genuinely extraordinary. the kind of person who made hard things look manageable. And one evening, he said, very quietly, that he felt like he was living someone else's life. Not resentfully, almost with curiosity, like he was describing a weather pattern. He wasn't depressed. He wasn't in crisis. He just could not find himself in any of it anymore. The life was full and good and correct and entirely foreign to him. That is role fatigue and self-abandonment at the same time. And they are still different things. Role fatigue is about energy and identity. You are tired of performing. Self-abandonment is about substance. There is no longer a self underneath the performance that is being withheld. You have actually misplaced it. The performance has been running so long that it has filled the space the original thing used to occupy. The recovery from this is slower than anyone wants and less dramatic than people expect. It does not happen in a retreat or a realization or a single honest conversation. It happens in small acts, repeated. The painting, the journal, the walked away from obligation that did not, as it turned out, cause the world to end. Elena has a set of paints in the back of the closet, unopened for 4 years. She keeps meaning to donate them. She doesn't. Some part of her that has gone very quiet will not permit it. That part is not gone. It is just waiting to find out whether she is coming back for it. The paints are still there. That's something. Chapter 9. The Novelty Narcotic. In the spring of his 38th year, Daniel quit his job, sold most of what he owned, and moved to Lisbon. Not impulsively. He'd thought about it for 2 years, planned it carefully, done the finances. He had real reasons. The work had stopped meaning anything. The city he'd lived in for a decade had started to feel like a costume he'd outgrown. He wanted, in a way he couldn't fully articulate, to feel something again. To be somewhere new enough that he had to be present. To shake loose whatever had been settling over him like sediment. Lisbon was genuinely beautiful. The light was different there. The kind of light that makes ordinary things look considered. He found a small apartment with old tiles and tall windows. He learned enough Portuguese to navigate. He met people, other arrivals mostly, the international population of people who had also left somewhere for reasons they explained differently depending on the day. He felt, for about 4 months, completely alive. Then one Tuesday morning he woke up, and there it was again. The same quiet, the same specific weight. Different tiles, same feeling. Lisbon had not fixed it. Lisbon had paused it, which he now understood was not the same thing at all. This is the novelty trap. And it is one of the most seductive and least effective strategies for treating loneliness that exists, because it works so well. Just not for long enough. And not on the right thing. New experiences are genuinely powerful. They are not a fraud or a distraction. They do something real. Novelty demands presence. When everything is unfamiliar, the brain cannot run on autopilot. You have to actually show up, actually perceive, actually navigate. The sediment lifts. The low hum of disconnection goes quiet because the foreground is too loud to hear it. For weeks, sometimes months, the feeling is gone, and you believe, you genuinely believe, that this time the thing was treated at the source. It wasn't. It was interrupted. The distinction matters because the interruption feels identical to the cure. Both produce the same relief. Both give you mornings where you wake up and the weight isn't there. But the cure changes the underlying condition. The interruption just changes the foreground. And eventually, inevitably, the foreground becomes familiar. The new city becomes your city. The The new job becomes your job. The new person becomes the person you've been with for 2 years and no longer see clearly. And when the foreground normalizes, the background returns. Every time, without exception, because you were always there. You brought yourself to Lisbon. You will bring yourself to wherever comes after Lisbon. The same self, the one with the hiding, the role fatigue, the gap between who you are and who you present, was on the plane, traveled efficiently, arrived without complaint, and waited patiently in the apartment with the tall windows until the novelty wore off. The novelty trap is particularly cruel because it looks exactly like growth. A new city looks like expansion. A new relationship looks like opening up. A new career looks like reinvention. From the outside, and often from the inside, these moves have the shape of someone actively addressing the problem, going toward something, living rather than stagnating. The vocabulary of self-improvement has colonized these choices so completely that it is almost impossible to ask the honest question, are you running toward something? Or are you just running? Because running is only useful if the problem is behind you. If the problem is inside you, and the loneliness we've been examining throughout this book is always, at its root, inside, running relocates the scenery and leaves everything that matters exactly where it was. I spent a period of my own life treating a persistent unease with consecutive new projects. Not travel. I didn't have Daniel's courage or his savings, but the professional version of the same instinct. A new direction, a new focus, something that required enough energy and attention to drown out the quieter thing underneath. It worked, in the short-term way things work when you're not looking at them. The projects were real, and some of them were good, but I was using them the way someone uses noise to avoid silence. And the silence was still there, faithfully, every time a project finished, and the next one hadn't started yet. Patient, unaddressed. Slightly larger, I eventually noticed, than it had been before. Here is what the novelty strategy reveals about the people who rely on it. And this includes most high-functioning, intelligent, restless adults. They are not failing to find the solution. They are finding it repeatedly and mistaking the temporary relief for the permanent fix. The intelligence that makes someone capable of building a new life in Lisbon is the same intelligence that constructs very convincing explanations for why this time is different. This move, this relationship, this project, this one goes to the root. And it does feel different. The feeling is real. But the feeling is novelty, which is a mechanism, not a cure. The cure, which is not dramatic, and will disappoint everyone who has been hoping this book builds towards some transformative instruction, is to stay. Not physically. Stay with yourself. Stay present to the thing that is actually uncomfortable rather than building a new foreground to drown it out. The discomfort of actually examining the gap between who you are and who you present, between the roles and the self underneath, between the connections you have and the depth they lack. That discomfort is the address of the problem. Daniel came back, eventually. Not to the same city, not to the same job, but to the same project, which was the only one that had ever mattered. The project of being findable. To himself first, then maybe to someone else. He took a walk on his first evening back. New neighborhood. Different light. He noticed he'd brought himself along again. This time, for the first time, he didn't experience that as bad news. Chapter 10. The ones who don't seem lonely. There is a man in his 60s named Walter who lives alone, works a job with no particular prestige, and has a social life that would look, to the outside observer, almost deliberately modest. He sees the same 4 or 5 people regularly. He does not have a packed calendar. He is not on social media in any meaningful sense. He has no side project building towards something larger. He takes walks. He reads. He cooks his own food with what appears to be genuine investment in the outcome. He is not performing contentment. There is a difference, and you can feel it. He is just, apparently, fine. More than fine. There is a quality to him that people notice without being able to name. He seems, in the precise and rare sense of the word, present. Nobody who spends time with Walter comes away feeling like he was somewhere else. This is not a personality type. It is not a temperament he was born with or a disposition that arrived fully formed. It is the observable result of something he does, or more accurately, something he does not do, that most people have never identified clearly enough to try. Walter is not defended, not in the pathological sense. He is not reckless, not without discretion. But the careful architecture of impression management that most adults have constructed and maintained and quietly exhausted themselves sustaining, he doesn't have it. Or rather, he has let it fall into sufficient disrepair that things land on him. Small things. A good meal lands. A friend's bad week lands. A conversation takes him somewhere he didn't expect to go, and he lets it. He is, in the technical sense, porous. The world gets in, people get in. This is the thing that low loneliness people do differently. Not extroversion, not positivity, not some heroic capacity for vulnerability. Porousness, a tolerance for being reached. The research on this is quieter than it should be. Studies on subjective loneliness consistently find that the variable most predictive of low loneliness is not the size of someone's social network, not the frequency of their social contact, not even the quality of their relationships as measured from the outside. It is something closer to what psychologists call emotional permeability. The degree to which a person allows their internal state to be genuinely affected by what is happening around them and between them and other people. The degree to which they are actually there, rather than managing from a slight remove. Most chronically lonely people are not there. They are close. They are present in every logistical sense. Physically in the room, making eye contact, responding appropriately. But there is a layer of management operating just below the surface. A continuous low-level process that is monitoring, adjusting, editing, controlling what gets in and what goes out. It is not dishonesty, it is defense. And defense, whatever it protects you from, also keeps everything out, including the things you are starving for. Walter does not have that layer running. Or when it starts to run, he notices it and sets it down. This is not natural. He learned it the way you learn anything, through the specific discomfort of doing the opposite of your instinct until the instinct changes. The cost of being well defended is one of the most under-examined trades in adult life. You protect yourself from the discomfort of being seen imperfectly, the misunderstanding, the judgment, the moment where someone has you slightly wrong. And in exchange, you also protect yourself from being seen at all. The defense does not discriminate. It keeps out the threat and the nourishment with equal efficiency. You end up safe and starving at the same time, which is the precise physiological profile of chronic loneliness. What Walter has, and this is the quality people sense without naming it, is a high tolerance for being known imperfectly. Someone has him slightly wrong, and he doesn't correct the record with any urgency. Someone misremembers a story about him, and he lets it go. He does not have a reputation to maintain in the way most people have a reputation to maintain. Carefully, anxiously, with one eye always on how the portrait is landing. He lets people have an approximate version of him and finds it, mostly, enough. This tolerance is not indifference. Walter cares about people. He is not detached. If anything, he is more present with people than most, more genuinely curious, more willing to stay in a conversation past the point where it becomes easy. But he is not monitoring the exchange for threats. He is just in it. And that quality of being actually simply unguardedly in it is so unusual in adult interaction that people feel it immediately without knowing what they're feeling. I made the mistake for years of thinking that the people who seemed most connected were the ones who were best at connection, most skilled, most socially intelligent, most practiced at the mechanics of intimacy. Walter is not especially skilled. He says the wrong things sometimes. He is occasionally awkward. He has gaps in his social awareness that a more defended person would never permit. But none of that matters, because the absence of defense means that even the awkward exchanges make contact. Even the wrong thing lands, because he was actually there when he said it. The skill is not the point. The presence is the point. You can be clumsy and present, and people will feel genuinely met by you. You can be smooth and defended, and people will have a pleasant time and drive home empty. Walter will see 2 of his 4 or 5 people this week. One conversation will go somewhere neither of them planned. He will not be managing it toward an outcome. He will just be in it, actually in it. The way you can only be in something when you are not simultaneously watching yourself be in it. He will come home and feel, in the quiet of his own company, like he was actually there today. For most people, that sentence reads as modest. For most people, it is out of reach. Chapter 11. The radical arithmetic of Les Sophie has 73 contacts in her phone that she would describe, if asked, as friends. Not acquaintances. She has a separate, larger category for those. Friends. People she genuinely likes. People she has history with. People she would help if they called. She maintains these friendships with real effort. The birthday messages, the check-ins, the periodic coffees and catch-ups and group dinners where everyone agrees they should do this more often. She is, by any social accounting, a person who invests in relationships. She also cannot remember the last time she said something true. Not a lie. She doesn't lie. Something true in the specific sense of this book. Something unedited. Something that arrived without being checked first against the question of how it would land with this particular person in this particular context. Something that cost her something to say. That kind of true. The kind that requires not just honesty, but a specific quality of trust. The trust that comes from a relationship deep enough that the floor will hold. That kind of trust requires time. Specific, unhurried, unagendaed time. The kind that is almost impossible to accumulate across 73 people simultaneously. Here is the arithmetic that nobody wants to do. Genuine depth, the kind where another person actually has access to your current interior life, not your archived one, requires repeated, sustained, low-stakes time together. Not intense time. Not therapeutic time. Just time where nothing is required of either person except presence. The research on friendship and closeness consistently points to the same variable. Accumulated hours of unstructured contact. Not quality time in the aspirational sense. Quantity of aimless, purposeless, going nowhere time. Most adults have completely eliminated this from their lives. Not intentionally, structurally. The calendar got full. The obligations multiplied. Every social interaction became an event. Scheduled, finite, purposeful. Dinner with an agenda, coffee with a catch-up to complete, a walk that has a time it needs to end. Even leisure got optimized. The result is a social life that is technically active and functionally shallow, because depth does not grow in scheduled 90-minute increments spread across 73 people. It grows in the unplanned third hour of a conversation that had no business going that long. It grows in the Tuesday evening when someone stops by for no reason and stays because neither of you has anywhere to be. It grows in the accumulation of small, repeated, low-pressure moments that don't make it into anyone's calendar because they were never planned. You cannot have that with 73 people. You cannot have it with 20. The math does not work. There are not enough hours, and more critically, there is not enough of you, not enough undefended, unperforming, actually present you, to distribute across a social network that size at any meaningful depth. The counterintuitive move, the one that feels wrong at every instinct level, the one that looks from the outside like withdrawal or failure or giving up, is to make the network smaller, deliberately, not in a dramatic purge, just in the quiet, ongoing choice to invest the limited resource of real presence into fewer people, to let some of the 73 relationships find their natural level, which for most of them is acquaintance, which is what they actually were. This feels like loss. It is, in a minor key, a loss. The social width has its own comfort, the sense of being broadly connected, broadly liked, broadly held. Giving up width feels like giving up safety, but it is the safety of a wide, shallow pool, which will not hold you when you need holding. It just looks like water. I watched a friend of mine, someone with a social life that made mine look monastic, make this move over about 18 months, not consciously at first. A season of life got demanding and the outer ring of relationships quietly lapsed. She stopped maintaining the maintenance. The birthday messages went unsent to the people she saw twice a year anyway. The group dinners thinned. She felt guilty about it for a while, then stopped because something else was happening simultaneously. The 2 or 3 relationships she was actually investing in were becoming something different. Longer conversations, more honest ones. The kind where you say the actual thing and stay in the room while it lands. She told me, near the end of that 18 months, that she felt more connected than she had in years. She also had, by her own count, less than a third of the active social relationships she'd had at the start. The shorter list had more in it. The specific practice, and it is a practice, not a decision you make once, is this. You identify the relationships that have the material to go deeper. Not the most fun ones, not the most comfortable ones, not the ones with the longest history. The ones where, if you brought the real thing, there is a reasonable chance it would be met. Then you give those relationships what depth actually requires. Time without an ending, presence without an agenda, the willingness to stay past the point where the conversation got easy, and you release gently the energy you were spending maintaining the width, not with hostility, just with honesty about what the relationships actually are and what they were always going to be. Sophie will have a dinner next week with all 7 members of a group she has known since college. It will be warm and loud and full of the comfortable shorthand of long familiarity. She will laugh genuinely. she will leave afterward, feeling the familiar mild emptiness. On Thursday, she is getting coffee with one person. No agenda. Nowhere to be after. She has been thinking about something she has never said out loud, and she is going to say it. The dinner will feel like connection. Thursday will be connection. The difference between those two sentences is the whole point. Chapter 12. What the other side actually feels like. Nobody tells you it's quiet. Every story about transformation has a feeling attached to it. The breakthrough, the release, the arrival at something that finally feels like home. The moment where the thing that was wrong becomes right, and you know it unmistakably in the way you know warmth when you step into it. The absence of chronic loneliness does not feel like that. It feels mostly like a reduction in background noise you had stopped noticing was there. Not a flood of warmth, not a sudden sense of belonging, just less. Less of the low signal, less of the thing running underneath everything. The persistent not quite right that you learned to carry so efficiently you forgot it had weight. One day you notice the weight is lighter, and you cannot identify exactly when that happened, or what specifically changed. It is, honestly, a little anticlimactic, which is probably why nobody writes about it this way. Anticlimactic does not move units, but anticlimactic is accurate. And accuracy is what this book has been trying to practice. Consider Thomas. Not a dramatic case. That is the point. He did not have a breakdown or a revelation or a significant loss that forced everything open. He just spent about 2 years doing the unglamorous work this book has been describing. He got quieter about the number of relationships he was maintaining. He started showing up to the remaining ones with less management running. He said some things he had been editing out for years, not in a therapeutic torrent, just incrementally, the way you might open a window a little at a time. He spent more time in his own company without filling it. He did a few things purely because he wanted to and for no other reason. Nothing dramatic happened. Except that slowly, the background frequency changed. He described it to me not as feeling more connected, but as feeling less fraudulent. Like the gap between the person he was and the person he was presenting had narrowed to something he could live with. Not closed entirely. He is realistic about that, which is itself a sign of something. But narrowed, and the narrowing, it turned out, was enough to change the quality of almost everything. This is what the research points to, and what almost nobody says plainly. The target state is not happiness. It is not warmth or belonging or the glow of being loved. Those are real, and they arrive sometimes in the life of a person who has done this work. But they are not the goal, and they are not the measure. The measure is the gap. The distance between who you actually are and who you are willing to be in the presence of other people. When that gap is small, the loneliness is small. When it is large, no amount of company will touch it. Most people have made the gap so habitual that they can no longer feel its edges. They just feel the result, the low note, the hollow evening, the inexplicable nothing after a full day of being around people. Thomas could not feel the edges of his gap either at the beginning. He just knew something was wrong in a way he couldn't locate. The locating is the work. It is not dramatic work. It does not look like anything from the outside. It looks like a man who started leaving dinner parties slightly earlier because he stopped pretending he wanted to stay. It looks like a woman who stopped sending the perfectly calibrated text and sent the honest one instead, and survived the slight awkwardness of it. It looks like someone who started taking the consciousness theory off the shelf not broadcasting it, not performing it, just allowing it to be a real part of who they are in conversations with people who might actually find it interesting, small, quiet, completely invisible to anyone watching. And underneath it, the architecture of a life in which being known becomes, gradually, survivable, then normal, then, and this takes longer than it should, and that's fine, something close to ordinary. Here is what the other side actually contains. 1 or 2 relationships where you are approximately, imperfectly, genuinely known. Not completely. No one is ever known completely, and the desire to be completely known is its own kind of trap. But known enough. Known in the way that matters, which is that the person has an accurate impression of your interior life, in the current tense. Not the archived version. It contains a relationship with your own company that does not require noise to be tolerable. Not solitude as discipline or achievement. Just the ability to be in a room by yourself without immediately needing to escape yourself. That capacity, which sounds minimal, turns out to do an enormous amount of work. A person who can be alone without distress is a person who is not desperate for company. A person who is not desperate for company can choose their connections rather than consume them. That choice is where quality begins. And it contains, this is the one that surprises people most, a reduced need for the things that were masking the loneliness. The calendar clears a little naturally. The phone gets checked less, not as discipline but as disinterest. The novelty projects stop feeling urgent. The need to be liked softens into a preference, which is an entirely different thing to carry. I still don't do this perfectly. There are weeks where the management layer comes back up, and I can feel it running. The familiar low-grade performance. The editing before the sentence arrives. I notice it sooner than I used to. I set it down with less ceremony. That is the whole of the progress, stretched out over years, noticing sooner, setting it down with less drama. Nobody gives you a marker for that. No one notices the shift from the outside. The life looks the same. You just come home feeling like you were actually there. That is the whole thing. It is almost nothing. It is the only thing. Noted, expanding the book with 1 additional chapter before the conclusion. Here is chapter 13, the practice of being findable, approximately 1,000 words. Chapter 13, the practice of being findable. There is no moment where it clicks. People want there to be. They want the chapter that ends with an instruction, specific, executable, something they can do tomorrow that will begin to close the gap. Something that has the shape of a solution. And there is something like that here. But it does not arrive as a revelation, and it does not feel, when you first do it, like anything significant is happening. It feels small. It feels almost insultingly small given the size of what it's supposed to address. That smallness is not a design flaw. It is the whole point. Here is what the work actually looks like. Not the theory of it. We have had 12 chapters of theory, and the theory is done. The practice, the daily, undramatic, largely invisible practice of becoming a person who can be found. Not found in the social sense. Found in the only sense that matters for what we have been discussing. The state of being locatable to another person. Present enough, undefended enough, specific enough that genuine contact becomes possible. That someone reaching towards you actually reaches something real, rather than the carefully maintained surface that has been standing in for you in most of your interactions for most of your adult life. Being findable is a practice because it is not a state you arrive at and maintain automatically. It requires small, repeated acts. And the acts are less about what you do with other people than about what you do with yourself, alone, before you ever get to them. The first act is the simplest and the most resisted. You have to know what you actually think, not what you should think, not the reasonable, balanced, socially calibrated position, what you specifically actually think about the thing that happened at work, about the conversation that left you unsettled, about the life you are living, and whether it is the one you would choose if you were choosing clearly. This sounds obvious. It is not obvious. Most people have been running the editing process for so long that the pre-edited version has become hard to access. You reach for your opinion, and what comes up first is the acceptable version, the version that has already been checked against the room. Getting to the actual version requires a beat of stillness that the modern life has been systematically eliminating. The journal is not a cliché. It is a technology for creating that beat. Elena's journal, the one she stopped keeping during the second pregnancy, was not a record. It was a process. Writing things down in order to find out what you think is qualitatively different from thinking things through in your head. Because the page cannot be managed. You cannot perform for it. What goes on the page tends to be closer to the actual thing, because there is no social consequence to manage. For people who have been managing so long that the manager has become the loudest voice, the page is often the only place the quieter voice gets heard at all. This is the foundation. Not connection with others. Connection with the current, accurate, unedited version of yourself. Without it, everything else this book has described, the depth over width, the disclosure, the willingness to be seen, has nothing to work with. You cannot bring yourself to a relationship you don't have access to. The second act is smaller still. You say one true thing per conversation, not a confession, not a performed vulnerability. One thing that you would normally have edited out, the actual reaction, the real opinion, the feeling you summarized into something more manageable. You say it at the level it actually exists, without the buffer. Then you stay in the room while it lands. This is where most people stop. The saying is hard enough. The staying is harder. The staying means you do not immediately diffuse it with a joke. Do not walk it back with a qualifier. Do not perform retroactive certainty that you were just being dramatic. You let it exist in the space between you and another person, and you tolerate the few seconds of uncertainty while they respond. Those seconds are where contact happens. The discomfort in them is not a signal that something is going wrong. It is the feeling of the gap closing. One true thing, per conversation. That is the whole practice at this level. Marcus, the one with the consciousness theory, the one who brought it up once 4 years ago and buried it after the polite face, started doing something like this without calling it anything. He stopped preemptively softening. When something genuinely interested him, he said so without checking first whether it would interest the room. When something bothered him, he named it at the actual size it existed, rather than the reduced size that would be easier to receive. The results were not uniformly positive. Some people found it slightly more than they'd signed up for. A few conversations landed in awkward places they didn't entirely recover from, but one of them didn't. One of them went somewhere neither person expected. The other person had their own version of the consciousness theory. Different subject, same quality of privately carried preoccupation, and it came out because Marcus's had. Two people, briefly, completely out of their front stage and in contact with something real. Marcus drove home afterward and felt something he didn't have a name for immediately. He found one eventually. He felt like he'd actually been there. The third act requires no other people at all. It is simply this. You protect some portion of your time from usefulness, not rest in the functional sense, not recovery so you can perform again tomorrow. Genuinely useless time. Time that produces nothing, optimizes nothing, maintains no relationship, and advances no goal. The painting. The walk with no destination. The book you are reading purely because you want to and for no reason that connects to anything else. This is how the self stays alive. Not through grand gestures of authenticity, through the quiet, private, repeated insistence that you exist for your own reasons, not only for the functions you perform for others. A person who does this, even in small doses, even imperfectly, has something to bring. A person who has stopped doing it entirely is running on the outline. The outline can last for years. It is remarkably durable, but it cannot be known. There is nothing there to find, which is why the practice is called what it is. You are not trying to connect better. You are trying to become someone who can be found. Everything else follows from that. Or it doesn't, but at least then it's an honest nothing, rather than the kind that surprises you at dinner when someone is talking and you are nodding in the right places, and the thought arrives again. Quiet as always, patient as always. Nobody in this room actually knows me. You will know at least that this time you gave them something to find. Here is chapter 14, the last thing nobody says out loud, approximately 1,000 words. Chapter 14, the last thing nobody says out loud. Most people will read this book and feel understood. Then they will put it down and change almost nothing, not because they didn't find it useful, not because the ideas failed to land. They will put it down and change almost nothing because understanding a mechanism and dismantling it are two completely different acts, and the distance between them is not intellectual. It is not a question of information. They have the information now. The distance is something older and quieter and considerably more resistant to books. It is fear, not the dramatic kind, not the fear you can point at and name and work through in a structured way. The quiet kind. The kind that doesn't announce itself as fear because it has been living inside you for so long it has started to feel like personality. Like just the way you are. Like a reasonable and considered approach to the world, rather than a decades-old defensive posture that has calcified so completely you can no longer feel its edges. Here is the fear, stated plainly. Being fully seen and found lacking is the most threatening experience available to a human being who is not in physical danger. Not being disliked, not being rejected in the social sense. Being seen, actually, accurately, fully seen, and having that not be enough. That specific outcome. The one where you finally stop managing, finally bring the real thing, finally close enough of the gap that genuine contact becomes possible. And the person on the other side looks at the actual you and finds it wanting. Not the performed you, not the managed you, the one underneath, the one you've been protecting. That fear is so large and so rarely spoken that most people have organized their entire adult social lives around never testing it. The hiding, the roles, the frequency without depth, the performance of connection, all of it at the bottom is the same architecture. A very elaborate system for ensuring that the real you is never exposed to the possibility of being found insufficient. Which means the loneliness was never the problem. The loneliness was the price, the cost of the protection. the entirely predictable outcome of a strategy whose primary goal was never connection. It was safety. And it achieved safety perfectly at the precise cost of everything the safety was supposed to protect you long enough to have. This is the thing nobody says out loud. Not in self-help books, not in therapy waiting rooms, not in the honest conversations people have when they finally have them. Because saying it out loud requires admitting that the loneliness was, on some level, chosen. Not consciously, not cruelly, but chosen in the way you choose anything when you consistently pick one option over another for 20 years. You chose the protection. The loneliness came with it. And some part of you, the part that is still quietly running the original calculation, has decided every single day that the protection is worth the cost. The question this book has been slowly building toward is not how to connect better. It is whether you are willing to revise that calculation, not eliminate it. The fear is not going anywhere. It will be present the next time you consider saying the true thing, the next time you think about bringing the consciousness theory out of retirement, the next time you sit across from someone and feel the pull toward the managed version of yourself rather than the real one. The fear will be there, smaller maybe with practice, less automatic, but there. The revision is not the elimination of the fear. It is the decision to act in its presence rather than around it. To say the true thing while the fear is watching. To bring the real version into the room and let the outcome be whatever it is, rather than engineering the outcome in advance by ensuring the real version never shows up. This is what Walter does, without calling it anything. This is what Thomas learned, slowly, over 2 quiet years. This is what Daniel was circling around in Lisbon before he understood what he was actually looking for. Not a new city, not a new version of the old strategy. The willingness to be findable, which requires, as its precondition, the willingness to risk being found and found insufficient. Most people never get there, not because they are weak or damaged or uniquely defended, because no one told them clearly enough that the discomfort on the other side of the protection is survivable. That being seen imperfectly is not the catastrophe the fear insists it is. That the people who have actually done this, who have let themselves be known, approximately and imperfectly, by at least one other person in their lives, universally report the same thing. It was not as dangerous as the protection made it feel. The protection was the most expensive thing they owned. They just never got an itemized bill. Here is yours. Every edited opinion, every summarized feeling, every interest kept private and version of yourself kept back and true thing swallowed in favor of the one that would land more cleanly. Every 11 minutes in the car before going inside. Every party where you stood behind glass. Every evening with the person you love most, where neither of you said the real thing because the real thing had been waiting so long, it felt like it belonged to someone else. That is the bill. It is not an accusation. It is an accounting. And the only thing to do with an accounting, once you finally see it clearly, is decide whether you want to keep running the same numbers. You can. The protection works. It has always worked. You will not be destroyed by the loneliness. You will carry it the way you have been carrying it, efficiently, quietly, in the background of a full and functional life. You will get very good at not noticing it. Or you can do the other thing, the small, embarrassing, undramatic, completely unglamorous other thing. You can let someone see you, not all of you, not perfectly, not with a vulnerability that has been prepared and practiced and delivered at the optimal emotional moment. Just More of you than you showed yesterday. That is the whole instruction. It was always the whole instruction. The rest was just the long way of explaining why it's so hard to follow, and why following it imperfectly on an ordinary Tuesday in a conversation that wasn't supposed to matter is the closest thing to a cure that actually exists. The loneliness was a signal. You were the source. And you, only you, are the fix. You were never missing the people. You had the people. You had the calendar and the group chats and the dinners and the partner and the colleagues and the friends who remember your birthday. You had proximity in quantities that previous generations of humans would have found excessive. You had contact on demand, the permanent theoretical availability of someone to talk to at any hour of any day. And still, the quiet, the specific, located, patient quiet that this book has been trying to name from the first page, it was never about the room being empty. It was about you not being fully in it. The managed version was in it. The edited version, the role-performing version, the carefully assembled version that had learned over years which parts of itself were safe to bring and which were better left in the car. That version showed up reliably, functioned well, was, by all accounts, good company. But company is not the same as presence, and presence, yours, actual and unmanaged, is the only thing that treats the thing you were feeling. Here is what I want to leave you with, and it is not a framework or a summary or a list of things to implement. It is just a true thing, stated plainly, that took me longer than it should have to understand. The loneliness was not evidence that you were unlovable. It was not evidence that you had chosen the wrong people or built the wrong life or were constitutionally incapable of the closeness you were hungry for. It was evidence of a gap, specific, closable, maintained almost entirely by habit and fear, between who you actually are and who you kept sending into the room instead. The gap is not dramatic. It is made of small things. The opinion you softened, the feeling you summarized, the interest you kept private because it got a polite face once and you decided the risk wasn't worth it. The version of yourself you deferred again and again for reasons that were always reasonable and collectively cost you years of being known. Those years are not recoverable. That is the one genuinely hard thing in this book, and it deserves to be said without softening. But the next ones are. The practice is small, embarrassingly small, given what it addresses. One true thing said at its actual size. One relationship given the time depth requires. One portion of your week that belongs to no one's needs but your own. The journal, the walk, the consciousness theory, finally allowed back into the room. None of it will feel like enough at first. Do it anyway. The gap closes the way it opened. Slowly, incrementally, through the accumulation of small choices that look like nothing from the outside and change everything from the inside. You were always in the room. You just kept leaving before anyone could see you arrive. This time, stay.